What happens when one of the most powerful black CEOs in America is told he doesn't belong in first class? Quentin Rhodes built his empire from nothing, rising from the South Side streets to become the billionaire founder of Axiom Forge. He commands boardrooms, negotiates billion-dollar deals, and funds scholarships for students who remind him of his younger self. But on Sky Vista Flight 247, none of that mattered. At the gate, a simple boarding pass became a weapon. A single phrase. "Your kind doesn't belong here," sliced deeper than any competitor's insult. How does a man who's mastered calm in the face of Wall Street storms react when dignity itself is denied at 30,000 feet? How do you hold your composure when the world is watching, cameras raised, waiting to see if you'll break? This isn't just the story of a seat on a plane. It's the story of how humiliation turned into leverage, how silence became strategy, and how one man's refusal to step aside forced an entire industry to confront its reflection. Stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss a moment of this unbelievable journey. The flight is boarding, and you'll want to see where it lands. People like you don't belong in 2A. The words cut through the first-class cabin of Sky Vista Airways Flight SV247 like a blade through glass. For a moment, it was as though the hum of the overhead vents and the shuffle of passengers settling into their seats had gone silent. Time froze. Quentin Rhodes, 55 years old, founder and CEO of Axiom Forge, felt the weight of that sentence land on his chest with the precision of a hammer strike. His boarding pass remained between his fingers, crisp and certain, the barcode still glowing faintly from the scan that had already been accepted at the gate. He had traveled on 6 continents, flown thousands of miles, and built a technology empire that touched financial institutions across the globe. But none of it mattered in this second. Not the $8,000 suit, not the platinum watch glinting at his wrist, not the Forbes cover story that still sat in hotel lobbies. In the eyes of the woman standing before him, none of it shielded him from the ancient, corrosive doubt about his right to be here. Her name badge read Meredith, angled deliberately so it was hard to see. Her smile was painted on, professional at a glance but rigid at the edges. Behind Quentin, he could feel the stairs piling up like weight on his back. Other passengers leaned forward, curiosity prickling in the air. Some already had phones in hand. The performance of modern travel and incident becomes content before it becomes resolved. Quentin's voice was steady, almost unnervingly calm. "I'm in seat 2A, he said, holding her gaze with the same composure that had once closed 9-figure contracts. "There's no mistake." Meredith's reply dripped with disbelief. "Our system doesn't show that. I'll need you to step aside while we sort this out." She shifted her attention to the aisle, already addressing the white man standing impatiently behind Quentin. Her voice brightened instantly, welcoming, deferential. "Sir, I can seat you while we handle this." Quentin laid his boarding pass flat on the armrest between them, a subtle but deliberate gesture, not a slam, not aggression, simply refusal to vanish. "No," he said evenly. "You'll handle this now." A flush rose across Meredith's cheeks, though her smile remained taut. A second flight attendant, Janine Porter, approached with a clipboard in hand. Janine's tone was rehearsed, careful, as if trying to soothe the audience rather than resolve the conflict. "Sir, if you'll allow us a moment, we'll sort out your ticket." Quentin didn't move. His jaw flexed, but his voice remained measured. The only thing you need to sort is the assumption you just made about me." A ripple of tension moved through the cabin. A cough, a shuffle of feet. The air itself seemed heavier. Across the aisle, a man in his early 60s smirked, leaning back into his seat. He wore the smugness of entitlement like cologne. Bradley Whitmore. Quentin would later learn his name, but for now he was simply another Roger in an endless parade of them men who assumed the world was theirs to take. Bradley chuckled, shaking his head. Somebody's in the wrong place. Quentin ignored him. His knuckles whitened around the edge of his boarding pass. But his tone carried no tremor. "I've spent 3 decades making sure people like me have a place in rooms like this, on planes like this, in seats like this, and I am not moving." Meredith's eyes narrowed. Theatrics hardened into performance. She lifted her chin and called toward the front. "Captain, we may need assistance. This passenger is refusing to comply." Phones tilted higher, screens glowing like watchful eyes. The moment had tipped from misunderstanding into confrontation. Quentin's pulse thudded in his ears, but he forced his breath steady, slow. Years of practice had taught him that, for a black man in America, calmness was survival, even when the fire inside burned white hot. Somewhere behind him, a younger voice spoke softly but clearly. "I'm recording." He turned just enough to catch sight of her, a young black woman, maybe mid-20s. Her phone held at chest level, her eyes sharp. Tiana Brooks. He didn't know her name yet, but her presence struck like a lifeline. Witness, proof. The purser Janine leaned closer, whispering just loud enough for Quentin to hear. "Sir, if you step aside, we can recheck the manifest." Quentin straightened, shoulders square, 6'2", frame athletic even under the tailored suit. He looked Janine in the eye, then Meredith, then Bradley smirking across the aisle. His voice carried now, not raised but resonant, filling the space with quiet authority. "No, I will not step aside, and if you think you can reduce me to a problem to be shuffled out of view, understand this, the world is already watching." Meredith's lips parted, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her expression. Then the mask snapped back into place. "Security," she said, her voice pitched louder, theatrical. "We have a situation." The words hung in the cabin like a siren. A situation. Quentin's thoughts spiraled inward for a moment, the familiar calculation unfurling in his mind. Do I swallow this, as I have 1,000 times before? Do I protect the deal waiting for me in San Francisco, the livelihoods of the hundreds employed at Axiom Forge? Or do I stand here and now and risk it all? His heart thudded once. Hard. The answer crystallized with painful clarity. He wasn't standing just for himself. He was standing for his daughter Nia, for the generations behind her who deserved not to inherit the same exhaustion carved into his bones. The aisle stirred. A tall figure in captain's stripes stepped forward from the cockpit. Captain Ethan Morales, salt and pepper hair cropped close, his presence commanding without effort. His voice carried authority sharpened by decades in the air. What seems to be the problem here? All eyes turned. Quentin drew a slow breath, his resolve settling like steel. This was no longer just about Seat 2A, this was about the sky itself, and 25 minutes from now, the airline would understand what it meant to underestimate Quentin Rhodes. The alarm buzzed at 4:45 a.m. in Quentin Rhodes's suite overlooking the Mississippi River. Even before his hand silenced the vibration, His body had already shifted from sleep into motion. Decades of discipline had trained him to rise before dawn, no matter the city, no matter the time zone. The room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. Outside the window, the lights of New Orleans flickered like a constellation scattered across dark water. A barge's horn echoed faintly as it cut the river below. Quentin pulled back the curtain with one smooth tug and stared out at the horizon. He had always loved these early moments before the city woke, when the noise of the world had not yet intruded. He rubbed his temples. The years showed now in the silver at his temples, in the faint lines across his brow. Yet the frame of his body remained solid, a testament to both genetics and the quiet stubbornness with which he resisted time. He whispered to himself, a ritual older than his company, older than his success. Not today, not this fight, not this failure. The words reminded him that each day carried its own battle. On the nightstand, his phone lit up. A message from Nia. "Knock 'em dead today. Dad, remember your meds. Don't make me text your assistant to check." The corner of his mouth tugged into a smile. Nia had always been the compass that kept him grounded. Now, in her second year at Howard's medical school, she spoke with a combination of tenderness and command that reminded him of her late grandmother. He typed back quickly, "Took the meds at 4:46. Dr. Rhodes can relax. Will call after the presentation. Love you." With that, he began the morning ritual, 15 push-ups, 20 crunches, a glass of cold water followed by black coffee, no sugar, no cream. He believed in starting each day with clarity. His suit hung ready on the chair, navy blue, tailored in Milan, pressed to perfection. At the edge of the tie rack, one particular piece of fabric weighted deep burgundy silk, slightly frayed at the edges. It was the first tie Nia had ever given him. She'd saved allowance for half a year when she was just 12, presenting it with trembling hands and wide eyes on his birthday. He wore it now only for the most important presentations. This trip was one of those. Axiom Forge, his company, had spent 3 years and tens of millions of dollars developing Sentinel Sphere, the next evolution of predictive security for financial institutions. That morning in San Francisco, he was scheduled to present the platform to the board of Stonebridge Capital, one of the largest investment groups in the country. If they signed, the deal would exceed $60 million in contracted revenue, not including expansion. More importantly, it would silence skeptics who still muttered in boardrooms about whether a black-founded technology firm could keep pace with the Silicon Valley giants. Quentin fastened his cufflinks, simple silver squares, tarnished at the edges. They were the only inheritance from his father, who had worked himself to death at 49 loading trucks at the South Chicago terminal. His father had never seen college, never seen a boardroom, but he had told his son, in one of their last conversations, "Boy, build something that can't be taken away." Each morning when Quentin slid those cufflinks into his shirt, he remembered. Breakfast was quick, egg whites, fruit, and another coffee in the half-lit hotel dining room. A pair of tourists stumbled in still dressed from the night before, laughing too loud, smelling of alcohol and cigarette smoke. Quentin smiled faintly at the contrast. He had been their age once, but his life had never allowed that kind of abandon. Discipline had been his ticket out. At 6:00 a.m. sharp, he called Diane, his assistant of nearly 20 years. She answered instantly, already at her desk on the West Coast. "Diane, always 2 steps ahead. Your itinerary's updated. Original flight canceled. I put you on Sky Vista Airways flight SV247 departing at 9. First class, seat 2A. Good work, Quentin said. And the Stonebridge presentation slides updated with the last security patch metrics. I'll have the legal team send you the biographical packet they requested again. He frowned. Again, that's the third time this week. I know, Diane replied. Feels like they're digging, or stalling. Quentin sighed, taking a measured sip of coffee. Forward it to legal. If they're searching for leverage, I want to be ready. He hung up and checked his reflection one final time. The tie sat neatly against the shirt. The suit jacket rested perfectly across his shoulders. He whispered again, "Not today." By 7, he was in the back of a rideshare headed to Louis Armstrong International. The driver, an older man with gray hair and a heavy Cajun accent, glanced in the mirror. "Business trip, always," Quentin replied with a small smile. "What line of work? Technology. My grandson's in computers." The driver chuckled. "Told him to pick something stable, but he won't listen. Wants to make games." Quentin looked out at the rising sun gilding the water. "The world belongs to those who build the future," he said. "Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one." The driver laughed, shaking his head. "Maybe you're right. Good luck to you." "Sir," inside the airport. Quentin moved like water through stone. TSA pre-check, laptop out, shoes off and back on in under a minute. The muscle memory of a man who had flown every week for 2 decades. He bought a second coffee and found himself staring out the concourse window at the sleek fuselage of a Sky Vista Airbus parked at gate B14. His phone buzzed again. Diane's voice was urgent when he answered. "Stonebridge's CEO just moved the meeting up, 1 o'clock instead of 2. That cuts close with your landing." "I'll make it," Quentin said. "No choice now." "Also," Diane added, "social chatter is trending about airline discrimination cases again. Department of Transportation report just dropped. Complaints up 30%, barely any fines." He let out a long breath. The numbers weren't new to him, but each report still stung, as if the statistics were a mirror of his own life. He ended the call and glanced again at the waiting aircraft. Sleek, powerful, indifferent. He had learned long ago that steel and algorithms could be made flawless, but people rarely were. Boarding began at 8:30. Quentin joined the short priority line for first class. Ahead of him, an elderly couple joked lightly about their grandchildren. Behind him, a man in a gray blazer complained loudly about bourbon service on his last flight. Quentin kept his eyes forward, posture straight, voice silent. When the gate agent scanned his ticket, the screen beeped green. Seat 2A. He walked down the jet bridge, the hum of engines vibrating faintly beneath his feet. The air inside the aircraft smelled of leather and recycled oxygen. He slid into his seat, placed his briefcase beneath the chair, and buckled in. For a brief moment, peace settled over him. The tension in his shoulders eased. The numbers for Stonebridge replayed in his head. The revenue graphs, the market share projections. He would deliver. He always did. And then a shadow fell across his aisle. "Sir," a voice said, dripping with polite disdain, "may I see your boarding pass again? You seem to be in the wrong seat." Quentin looked up. Meredith Sloan stood over him, name badge glinting, smile sharp as glass. The calm inside him began to fracture. Quentin Rhodes had learned long ago that moments of prejudice rarely arrived with horns blaring or signs flashing. They slipped in quietly. disguised as policies, procedures, glitches, or misunderstandings. But sometimes, like this moment, they came sharpened into words that pierced the air with brutal clarity. "Sir, I said you are in the wrong seat," Meredith Sloan repeated, her voice edged with the kind of certainty that was less about facts and more about assumption. Quentin sat back against the leather of seat 2A and studied her carefully. He could feel the temperature inside him rise, but his tone, when it came, was steady as stone. "This is my seat, 2A, confirmed by your own scanner at the gate. Would you like to see the boarding pass again?" He held it up, not thrusting, not aggressive, simply presenting the truth. The barcode still glowed faintly where it had been read moments ago. Meredith glanced at it, her eyes sliding across it like it was an inconvenient piece of paper rather than proof. "I'm not sure how it got scanned," she said finally, her lips tight. "The system must be glitching. You're not listed in this cabin." Quentin's jaw flexed. "That's impossible. My assistant booked it this morning. Confirmation email is right here." He unlocked his phone, the itinerary glowing bright against the cabin's dimmed lights. His thumb hovered over the screen as he angled it toward her. Meredith didn't lean closer. Instead, she adjusted her posture, voice loud enough now for surrounding passengers to hear. "You'll need to step into the galley while we sort this out." The words fell heavy, calculated. Step aside, step out of sight, step back. Quentin knew this dance. He had seen it on sidewalks, in boardrooms, in restaurants where a host suddenly misplaced a reservation. A subtle push to the margins dressed up in professionalism. His pulse quickened, but he kept his voice even. "No, I will not step aside. This is my seat." The air in the cabin seemed to shift. Passengers in the rows nearby turned slightly, pretending not to listen while their eyes darted between the two. A man across the aisle, salt and pepper hair, gold cufflinks flashing, smirked as if entertained. Bradley Whitmore. His chuckle slipped out like smoke, loud enough for Quentin to hear. "Somebody wandered into the wrong neighborhood," Bradley muttered under his breath, though the smirk on his lips betrayed his satisfaction at being overheard. Quentin turned his gaze on him, calm but direct. "Did you say something?" Bradley lifted his eyebrows in mock innocence. "Just seems like confusion. That's all." Quentin let the silence stretch a second longer before turning back to Meredith. "Call your supervisor," he said quietly. Meredith's expression hardened. "Sir, I don't appreciate your tone. If you continue to be uncooperative, I'll have to request security remove you." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Phones lifted higher now, subtle at first, then openly recording. The shift was unmistakable. This was no longer just an exchange. It had become a scene. Quentin took a slow breath, every muscle in his body taut with restraint. His voice, when it came, was almost soft. "Security. For sitting in the seat I paid for?" Behind him, a younger voice spoke, calm but clear. "I'm recording this." He glanced over his shoulder. A woman in her 20s, dark braids pulled into a bun, phone steady in her hand. Her eyes were fierce, focused. Tiana Brooks. Quentin did not know her name yet, but her presence brought a small measure of steadiness. Someone saw, someone would remember. Meredith flushed. "Passengers are being delayed. Please cooperate." "I am cooperating," Quentin replied. "I'm sitting in my assigned seat." Bradley leaned forward, his smirk now openly hostile. "Come on. Man, just move. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Quentin turned his head slowly. His stare met Bradley's, not with heat, but with a weight that made the older man shift uncomfortably in his seat. Harder for who, Quentin asked softly. Meredith exhaled sharply and reached for the intercom. Captain Morales to the cabin. Please, we have a situation. The words echoed like a verdict. A situation. Quentin closed his eyes for a moment. He had always hated that phrase. It was never applied to the man shouting at a bartender for refusing him more bourbon. It was never applied to the passenger harassing a flight attendant. It was always reserved for people like him. His father's voice whispered from memory. Boy, never give them a reason. The world already has one waiting. But his daughter's voice cut through louder, clearer. Knock them dead today. Dad, remember your worth. The cabin door opened. Captain Ethan Morales stepped through. Tall, composed, uniform crisp. His eyes scanned the scene with the quick precision of someone accustomed to assessing danger at 30,000 feet. What seems to be the problem here? His voice carried, calm yet authoritative. Meredith straightened, mask of professionalism snapping into place. Captain, this passenger's occupying a seat that isn't his. He refuses to move. Quentin stood, slow and deliberate, towering to his full height. His voice was even, calm, deliberate. Captain, my boarding pass is for seat 2A. It was scanned and accepted at the gate. This agent claims the system changed my reservation. She has refused to show me proof. He held out the pass, steady in his hand. The captain's eyes flicked to it, then to the glowing confirmation on Quentin's phone. He took a long pause. Then he looked at Meredith. Show me the manifest. Meredith hesitated. Her fingers twitched at the tablet she held. For the first time, uncertainty cracked her facade. Slowly, reluctantly, she turned the screen toward the captain. Captain Morales studied it, scrolling carefully, his brow furrowed. He looked back up, voice measured but edged with something colder. There's no record of a change. Mr. Rhodes is listed as seat 2A. The silence that followed was thick. Passengers shifted in their seats. Bradley's smirk faltered. Tiana's phone caught every second. Quentin spoke quietly. So, what exactly was the problem? Meredith's lips parted. She faltered. It must have been a glitch. The captain's eyes narrowed. He held her gaze a beat too long, enough for the truth to bleed through her words. Then he turned back to Quentin. Mr. Rhodes, please, make yourself comfortable. This is your seat. Relief was not what Quentin felt. Not yet. What coursed through him was something heavier, something sharper. The knowledge that had the captain not intervened, had the phones not been raised, had witnesses not been present, the story would have ended differently. He sat down slowly, adjusting his tie, reclaiming the leather seat that had been his all along. The eyes of the cabin followed him, some supportive, some skeptical, some simply entertained. Bradley leaned back, muttering under his breath. Drama for no reason. Quentin ignored him. He had larger storms to manage. Meredith retreated toward the galley, her cheeks flushed. Janine, the purser, stepped forward now, her voice softer, more careful. Mr. Rhodes, can I bring you some water? Quentin looked at her, then nodded once. Yes, thank you. The captain lingered a moment longer. He bent slightly, lowering his voice so only Quentin could hear. You're not the first, he said quietly, and you won't be the last. but you handled that the only way that matters. Document everything." Their eyes met. An unspoken understanding passed between them, a lifetime of navigating storms unseen by those who never had to think about them. Quentin inclined his head. "Thank you, Captain." The captain straightened and returned to the cockpit. The hum of the cabin resumed, though the air felt changed. Quentin leaned back in his seat, pulling out his phone. His fingers opened the secure notes app. Already, he began recording details, time, names, exact words. He had learned long ago that memory fades, but documentation endures. Across the aisle, Tiana caught his eye. She gave a small nod, as if to say, "I've got this too." Her phone remained steady in her hands. Quentin closed his eyes briefly. The day had only just begun, but already the battle lines were drawn. Quentin Rhodes sat motionless in seat 2A, the hum of the engine still low as the plane completed boarding. His body appeared composed, but inside, his mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. The captain's validation of his ticket should have ended the matter, yet the tension clung to the air like smoke. Passengers still shifted in their seats, pretending to scroll phones while stealing glances. He could feel their curiosity, their hunger for spectacle. He wanted to bury himself in his presentation slides, to focus on the meeting ahead in San Francisco. But his mind kept circling back to Meredith's words. "You're in the wrong seat." And beneath those words, the one sentence she never admitted but had already spoken in her tone, her narrowed gaze, the dismissal that preceded the escalation. "You don't belong here." His heart still pounded, not from fear but from exhaustion. Exhaustion born of decades carrying this invisible weight. The constant calculation of how to respond without confirming someone else's caricature of who you were. The purser, Janine, returned with a glass of water, her movements careful, her eyes downcast. She placed it on Quentin's tray table, then leaned slightly closer. "Mr. Rhodes, on behalf of the crew, I'd like to apologize for earlier." Quentin studied her. "Are you apologizing for what happened, or for how it looked?" Her lips parted. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "For both." There was honesty in her tone, though it was the honesty of someone who knew they were trying to mend something larger than themselves. Quentin nodded once, lifting the glass but not drinking, across the aisle. Bradley Whitmore gave a theatrical sigh. "Unbelievable," he muttered, shifting in his seat as though inconvenienced by someone else's dignity. His wife, seated beside him, laid a hand on his arm in quiet warning. Bradley ignored her, turning his attention toward Quentin. "Look, man, you got what you wanted. Why drag it out? Some of us just want to get to San Francisco without a circus." Quentin set the glass down slowly. He turned his head toward Bradley, his voice calm but carrying. "A circus happens when people perform, and I'm not the one performing." A ripple of silence spread again. Passengers caught between discomfort and fascination. Bradley's smirk faltered, though his pride would not allow retreat. "Whatever you say." Quentin let the moment hang, then turned back to his tablet, though his eyes lingered not on data but on the dark reflection of himself in the screen. Inside, the calculation began again. He had a company to protect, a billion-dollar contract on the line, employees depending on his stability. He could not afford distractions, not today. And yet, how many times had he swallowed indignities in the name of progress? How many times had silence been the price of success? His father had taught him silence as survival. His daughter urged him toward voice as legacy. Which path carried more weight now? A ping pulled him back. A message from Diane, his chief of staff, slid across the tablet. Western Financial wants to move your presentation up by another 30 minutes. Their CEO will join in person. Critical. He inhaled sharply. 30 minutes earlier meant even less margin for error. He typed quickly, confirmed. Prep revised agenda, add risk metrics. Then he paused, his fingers hovering. He added, and Diane, start a secure file, incident report. Title it Flight SV247. He pressed send. Tiana Brooks shifted in her seat 2 rows back, still filming discreetly. She caught Quentin's eye and offered the faintest smile, as if to say, I saw it all. I've got your back. Quentin nodded once. He didn't know her story, but he understood the unspoken solidarity. That look had passed between strangers before, in offices, in lobbies, on sidewalks, the understanding that you were not imagining it, that the insult was real, that someone else had borne witness. The aircraft door closed with a thunk. The safety demonstration began, voices of the crew brisk, efficient. Meredith recited lines with perfect diction, her mask of professionalism restored. But Quentin noticed how she avoided looking his way, how her voice faltered slightly when she gestured toward his row. The plane pushed back from the gate. As the engines roared to life, Quentin leaned his head back and closed his eyes. He tried to focus on breathing, on calming the pounding in his chest, but his thoughts refused stillness. He thought of Nia, second-year medical student, bright and relentless. He thought of her text that morning, knock them dead today. Dad. He thought of the years he had fought to give her a world better than the one he inherited. And he thought of what she might see on her phone right now if someone uploaded the video already circulating through this cabin. Would she see her father's composure, his insistence on dignity? Or would she see another black man being reduced to a situation in first class? The engines thundered as the plane accelerated. The cabin tilted back, gravity pressing Quentin into the seat. His fingers tightened around the armrest, not from fear of flying, but from the unrelenting thought that even here, in the supposed quiet of the clouds, the old battles had followed him. At 10,000 feet, the seatbelt sign chimed off. Bradley reclined with a groan of entitlement, already demanding a bourbon from the passing attendant. Tiana kept her phone steady, whispering into it now, narrating softly for those watching her live stream. Quentin pulled out his notebook. Not digital this time, but leather-bound, the one he used when thoughts needed permanence. He began writing, not business notes, but raw detail, timestamps, names, phrases, the look in Meredith's eyes when she dismissed his boarding pass, the smirk on Bradley's face, the way the cabin fell into hush when the captain arrived. Document everything, the captain had said. Quentin paused, pen hovering. His chest tightened. What was he really documenting? Another personal humiliation to be folded into years of files? Or was this the moment he chose to transform private pain into public purpose? The pen touched paper again. He wrote 3 words in deliberate strokes. This ends here. Janine returned with his water refilled. Her voice was low, almost hesitant. Mr. Rhodes, I know it isn't my place, but she's done this before. Quentin looked at her sharply. Meredith Janine hesitated, then nodded. Not the same way, but other passengers. Always people who look like you. Complaints never stick. Management calls it misunderstandings. Quentin's eyes narrowed, and yet she remains chief attendant. Janine's lips pressed tight. I shouldn't say more. She placed the glass on his tray and moved on quickly. But her words stayed behind like a lit fuse. Quentin sat still, his mind racing. If this wasn't isolated, then it wasn't just about him. It was a pattern. And patterns were something he knew how to handle. His company built technology that turned patterns into proof, into power. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very systems he designed to protect banks and governments from breaches might now serve to hold an airline accountable for something far older, far uglier. He tapped his phone awake, opening his secure server. A new folder. A title appeared at the top, Accountability Now, across the aisle. Bradley scoffed loudly at something on his phone, muttering to himself, but Quentin no longer looked his way. His focus had shifted. The fight was no longer just for Seat 2A. It was for the structure that allowed this moment to repeat itself generation after generation. Tiana's voice carried faintly from behind. Yes, I'm still live. People need to see this. They need to know it still happens. Quentin's pen scratched across the notebook again. Steady now, almost calm. He was no longer debating whether to fight. He was planning how. The sky outside the window stretched endless and blue. The plane soared higher, but Quentin knew the real altitude would be measured not in miles, but in what came next. The cabin was quiet, but the battle had only just begun. The plane had leveled at cruising altitude. The hum of the engines settled into a steady drone, a background rhythm that usually lulled Quentin Rhodes into focus during flights. Today, it only deepened the unease in his chest. He tried to concentrate on the glowing tablet in front of him. The presentation slides for Western Financial. Numbers, graphs, projections. Normally, these figures calmed him. They were predictable, controllable, but every line blurred, every chart dissolved into Meredith's face, Bradley's smirk, Janine's whispered confession. He closed the tablet with more force than he intended. His reflection stared back from the dark screen. A man who had mastered the art of composure, but who could feel the tectonic plates of his patience grinding against each other. A voice broke through the quiet, not loud, but steady, carrying across the first-class cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm live here on Flight SV247, and what you're about to see tells you everything about America in 2025. Quentin turned his head slowly. Tiana Brooks. Phone angled upward, her expression calm but deliberate. She was streaming to an audience already gathering by the thousands. Earlier today, she continued, her voice even but infused with steel. This man, Quentin Rhodes, was denied his rightful seat in first class by a flight attendant who decided he didn't belong. We all heard her call security, though his boarding pass was valid. We all saw her dismiss him until the captain intervened, and now we sit in silence as if nothing happened. A hush rippled across the cabin. Bradley rolled his eyes dramatically, muttering something under his breath, but no one echoed him this time. Phones emerged across the rows, passengers now fully aware they were witnesses not only to an incident, but to history unfolding in real time. Quentin felt heat rise in his chest. He had never asked to be someone's cause, never sought to be the symbol in another person's battle. His life was already public enough, his company under constant scrutiny. Yet there was a strange clarity in watching Tiana, her conviction cutting through the carefully rehearsed civility of air travel. He leaned slightly toward her, his voice low but audible enough for nearby Rose. "Miss, you don't need to put me at the center of this. I'm fine." Tiana held his gaze. "With respect, Mr. Rhodes, you're not fine. None of us are fine if this keeps happening." She angled her phone again. He has spent decades building what few people of color in this country ever reach. And still, in 2025, he is treated as if he is trespassing in a seat he paid for. That is the truth, and the truth deserves light. Quentin's throat tightened. Part of him wanted to tell her to stop, to let him manage this quietly through legal channels and corporate leverage. Another part, a deeper part, recognized the power in what she was doing. The story was no longer his to contain. It was already larger than him. He sat back slowly, breathing deep. If this was the fire, he would decide how to shape its burn. Janine passed through the aisle, her expression tight, a tray of drinks trembling slightly in her grip. Bradley reached out for his bourbon and muttered, "All this drama for nothing. Some people just love to play the victim." Quentin turned his head. His voice cut through the cabin, calm but sharp enough to slice Bradley's smugness. "Is that what you think this is? A performance?" Bradley froze mid-sip, caught between arrogance and uncertainty. "I think people blow things out of proportion." Quentin let silence stretch, then replied, "The fact that you see this as proportion tells me everything about how little you've ever been measured by someone else's prejudice." The weight of the words landed heavy. Even Bradley's wife turned away, her lips pressed tight. Bradley muttered something unintelligible, shrinking into his seat, his earlier bravado shriveling under the collective gaze of the cabin. Quentin turned back toward his tablet but didn't reopen it. Instead, he pulled his leather-bound notebook closer. His pen scratched across the page with deliberate force. Details, patterns, timelines. But this time, he wasn't just recording an incident, he was architecting a response. The engines roared softly as the aircraft sliced through the sky. Quentin's mind raced with possibilities. Axiom Forge had tools, data, algorithms capable of detecting hidden patterns across vast systems. What if the same principles that safeguarded global finance could be applied to systemic discrimination, complaints logged and ignored, grievances dismissed as isolated, numbers lost in bureaucracy, but numbers told stories if you knew how to read them? He paused, tapping the pen against the page. Could he dare pivot his company in this direction? Could he take one moment of personal pain and turn it into an entire platform of accountability? His board would balk. Investors would question. But the alternative was silence. And silence, he realized, had cost him more over a lifetime than any financial risk could. The flight attendant, Meredith, passed by for the first time since takeoff. Her eyes flicked toward him, then away quickly, a shadow of defiance lingering. He caught it, the look that said she still believed she had been right, even if the evidence proved otherwise. His jaw tightened. She was not the disease, only the symptom. The system that protected her, that explained away her actions, that allowed repetition without consequence, that was the real target. He jotted a phrase into the notebook, underlined twice. Make the invisible visible. The plane shook gently with turbulence, coffee cups rattling. Quentin barely noticed. His mind had shifted entirely. He was no longer simply enduring an insult. He was drafting a blueprint for revolution. Tiana's voice carried again, softer now, speaking directly to her live audience. The comments are flooding in. People are sharing their own experiences. Doctors, lawyers, students, every story the same. Every story ignored until someone with power forces acknowledgement. Quentin heard it. The connection of voices across miles, the collective weight of stories that had lived in shadows. His chest tightened, but this time it wasn't just anger, it was recognition, proof that he wasn't alone, that what happened to him was part of a vast pattern, one that demanded more than survival. His phone buzzed as Wi-Fi connected. Notifications exploded across the screen. Mentions, tags, headlines already forming. He saw his own name trending, his face in thumbnails pulled from shaky passenger videos. Black CEO denied first class blared across half a dozen feeds. He exhaled slowly, a man watching his private humiliation transform into public reckoning in real time. He typed a single message to Diane. "We're not negotiating. We're building something bigger. Call the team. Start drafting framework tonight." Her reply came instantly. "Understood. What should we call it?" Quentin looked at his notebook. The words stared back, sharp and clear. Accountability. Now, he sent the phrase, the commitment crystallized. The engines roared on, carrying them westward, but Quentin knew the true turbulence was only beginning. Quentin Rhodes sat back in his seat, the white noise of the plane blending with the storm in his mind. His fingers hovered over the tablet, yet he did not open it. Charts and projections had no meaning compared to the visceral weight pressing down on his chest. Each breath felt heavy, like he was carrying not just himself but the invisible burden of every slight, every judgment, every dismissal that had ever followed him through boardrooms, airports, and hotel lobbies. He glanced at Tiana Brooks across the aisle. She had stopped streaming now, phone lowered, but her gaze never wavered. There was a quiet defiance in her posture, the kind that demanded acknowledgement without forcing confrontation. Quentin felt a surge of gratitude mixed with discomfort. Gratitude for her courage, discomfort because he had never asked to be anyone's symbol. He had only ever wanted to exist, to work, to be respected on his merits. The murmurs of the cabin rose again as passengers leaned forward, whispering among themselves, phones capturing every movement, every glance. Quentin felt their eyes on him, not in admiration, but in expectation. The collective curiosity was palpable, and the weight of it pressed against his chest with the force of gravity itself. He wanted to tell them it was just a misunderstanding, a glitch in the system, something trivial, but those words stuck in his throat. Bradley Whitmore, seated a few rows behind, had found a new target for his indignation. "I can't believe this. It's ridiculous. We're all just trying to get to our destination, and now we're part of some social media circus." He shook his head, turning to his wife. "It's like the whole world has to weigh in on every little thing." Quentin did not respond. He knew that responding directly to Bradley would only escalate, would play into the narrative that had already begun to form the angry black executive disrupting the comfort of others. Instead, he focused on the subtle shifts in the cabin. Flight attendants moved with calculated precision, aware that eyes were on them now. Even Janine, who had offered a quiet apology earlier, now walked the aisle with a more deliberate cadence, careful not to provoke, careful not to falter. Quentin's thoughts drifted to the countless hours he had spent building next tech solutions. Every deal negotiated, every product launched, every board meeting survived had required composure, calculation, and restraint. And yet all of that mastery seemed to vanish in the face of a single human judgment, a single act of bias that rendered his accomplishments invisible. He thought of his father, who had taught him to carry himself with dignity, even when the world tried to diminish him, to remain calm, to choose battles wisely, to never let anger dictate action. That lesson had served him well for decades. Yet here he was, tested in a setting as mundane and as public as an airplane cabin. The flight attendants whispered among themselves, glancing in his direction, unsure of how to proceed. The captain had resumed his announcements, monotone and detached, but the tension in the cabin was palpable. Quentin felt as though he were a live wire, each passenger a conductor waiting to complete the circuit. Tiana, sensing his internal conflict, leaned slightly closer. "Mr. Rhodes, you don't have to act like you're alone in this. The world is watching, yes, but so is history. People need to see the truth, and they need to see how you handle it." Quentin's jaw tightened. He had never sought fame for endurance, for silent resilience, for dignity under fire. He had only sought to do his work, to lead, to innovate. But now, in this pressurized metal tube hurtling through the sky, he realized that his silence might speak louder than any presentation, any boardroom speech, any press release ever could. A young passenger in the row ahead, no more than 16, whispered to her mother, "Mom, look at him. He's not angry, but everyone else is." Her mother nodded quietly, eyes wide, a small gesture of acknowledgement, a silent recognition of injustice. Quentin felt the weight of that acknowledgement settle into his chest, heavy but grounding. Bradley's muttered complaints had shifted into a low growl of frustration. He tapped his phone repeatedly, muttering to himself, oblivious to the way other passengers now subtly aligned themselves with Quentin. The dynamics of power, previously unquestioned, had begun to shift. Quentin's thoughts turned to the consequences of action versus inaction. He had the means to escalate, to leverage his position and influence, but he also understood the subtle dangers of reaction in a public forum. One misstep could define him in the eyes of the public as reactive, as aggressive, as unstable. But inaction would allow the prejudice, the bias, the silent assumptions of entitlement to stand unchallenged. He breathed slowly, counting each inhale and exhale, grounding himself in the present moment. The tablet remained closed, a symbol of restraint and deliberate pause. He had been trained to act with precision, to allow strategy to guide his responses. Yet strategy without courage was nothing more than paralysis. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight attendants prepared for service. Quentin watched their movements, noting the subtle shift in tension as they adjusted to the scrutiny of 1,000 eyes. He realized that their discomfort mirrored his own. The power dynamics in the cabin were now in flux, not dictated solely by hierarchy, but by awareness and witness. Tiana's voice broke the internal reverie again, quieter this time, meant only for him. "You have a choice, Mr. Rhodes. You can let this moment pass quietly, or you can turn it into something that matters, something that changes the conversation." Quentin's mind wrestled with the options. Every instinct urged caution, whispered the value of silence. But another voice, deeper and more insistent, reminded him that history favored the brave, that endurance alone was not enough, that sometimes the act of simply refusing to be diminished, refusing to be ignored, was itself revolutionary. He glanced down at the tablet again, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on him. Not just for him, but for every person who had ever been judged by the color of their skin, for every child watching, for every colleague and competitor whose assumptions he had quietly carried. Quentin leaned back, letting the seat recline slightly. Eyes closing for a moment as he gathered himself. He did not know yet what form his action would take, but he understood the imperative. Action was necessary. Silence was complicity, and in that quiet, high above the ground, he felt a resolve harden within him. A flight attendant approached, hesitant yet purposeful, bringing a tablet from the galley. Janine's voice was soft, almost apologetic, yet firm. "Sir, the captain has asked me to ensure you have everything you need. Please, take a look." Quentin opened the tablet, scrolling through the system logs. Data that would normally feel abstract now carried immediate weight. Every discrepancy, every anomaly, every potential point of leverage unfolded before him. The path was clear, if fraught with risk, but the moment for hesitation had passed. He looked around the cabin once more. Passengers no longer whispered, no longer scrolled absent-mindedly. Their eyes were on him, not as a celebrity, not as an obstacle, but as a person navigating the unfairness of a moment with poise and power. He felt the gravity of that responsibility, but also a strange liberation. For the first time that day, Quentin Rhodes felt a clarity that came not from his training, his experience, or his achievements, but from something deeper, the recognition that dignity, courage, and truth were always in his control, even when circumstance tried to take them away. He took a slow breath, fingers poised over the tablet, and prepared to act. The cabin waited, the world waited, and Quentin, calm, measured, resolute, understood that the next moments would define more than a flight. They would define an era. The cabin air had grown heavy. Passengers, who moments earlier had been scrolling through emails or flipping through in-flight magazines, were now part of an audience, their attention fixed on Quentin Rhodes. He was not just a man in a suit anymore. He was the focal point of something larger, something raw, unresolved, and electric. Quentin adjusted the cuff of his shirt, the tarnished silver squares his father once wore. He thought of the man who had worked 2 jobs until his heart gave out, who had never flown first class, who had never been given the benefit of doubt. His father had told him once, long ago, that there would come moments in life when silence would feel safer but would cost more in the long run. Quentin wondered if this was that moment. Captain Ethan Morales had retreated back toward the cockpit after defusing the earlier confrontation, but his presence lingered. Quentin could feel the captain's silent watchfulness, a promise that someone with authority had seen what had happened. Still, Quentin knew authority could shift as quickly as turbulence. One wrong move and the story would be twisted into something else entirely. Across the aisle, Tiana Brooks kept her phone ready. Her jaw was set, eyes alert. She wasn't live streaming now, but she had captured enough to make sure the world knew what had happened. Quentin wasn't sure if he was grateful or resentful. A part of him longed for privacy, for the chance to process the sting of discrimination in silence. But another part of him knew the truth. Silence was what had allowed people like Meredith Sloan to keep their jobs long after patterns of complaints had piled up. Bradley Whitmore, slouched in his seat, leaned over to his wife with exaggerated exasperation. "This is exactly what's wrong with people these days," he muttered loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. always looking for something to be offended by. He shook his head, then looked directly at Quentin. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill. Nobody cares where you sit. Just move and stop inconveniencing the rest of us." Quentin's eyes lifted slowly, meeting Bradley's gaze. He did not raise his voice. He did not scowl. His calmness itself was unsettling. "You don't get to decide what matters to me," he said, "or to anyone else who has lived through this kind of treatment over and over again. You call it a molehill because you've never had to climb it every single day of your life." The words lingered. A hush spread through the nearby rows. Bradley looked away first, shifting uncomfortably, pretending to check his phone. For once, the smug entitlement faltered. Quentin leaned back into his seat. But inside, the storm churned. Should he let the flight pass quietly now? Should he sit still, reach San Francisco, walk into the boardroom, and deliver the flawless pitch that could secure a deal worth tens of millions? Was it smarter to bury the moment under success, to prove through excellence that the insult at the gate could not define him? Or was the greater act of leadership to seize this moment, to transform the indignity into fuel for something larger, something lasting? His thoughts ran like calculations, like the algorithms his engineers wrote, processing risk and reward at dizzying speed. On one side, personal safety and professional success. On the other, confrontation, exposure, the possibility of backlash that could ripple across his company and his employees. His jaw tightened. Both paths were costly. A flight attendant appeared with a tray of drinks, but her hands trembled slightly as she poured sparkling water into his glass. She leaned close, whispering so only he could hear. "I'm sorry for what happened earlier. Not everyone on this crew agrees with Meredith." Her eyes flicked nervously to Bradley, then back to him. "Some of us are tired too." Quentin inclined his head, accepting the quiet solidarity. He had learned to treasure such moments, the fleeting connections with those who understood the weight of living under constant scrutiny. He murmured back, "Thank you." As she moved down the aisle, Quentin noticed other passengers watching him differently now. No longer just a man in a tailored suit, but a man carrying himself with unshakable resolve. They whispered among themselves, but there was less mockery, more reflection. Witnesses were beginning to recognize the gravity of what they had seen. The plane shuddered briefly in turbulence, rattling trays and causing a few gasps. Quentin steadied his glass, unflinching. Inside, however, he felt the turbulence mirrored his state of mind. He had never been a man to act impulsively. Every decision had been weighed, measured, calculated. Yet here he was, confronted with a situation that demanded something beyond calculation. Tiana leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Rhodes, if you do nothing, they'll call this a misunderstanding. They'll brush it off. But if you stand your ground, if you make it known, it could mean something bigger. It could mean change." He turned his head, studying her expression. She was young, but her words carried the conviction of someone who understood the stakes. He thought of his daughter, Nia, who was not here but whose voice he could almost hear. She would tell him the same thing. She would remind him of the lessons he had given her, of the strength he had demanded she see in herself when the world tried to diminish her. Quentin's hand hovered over his phone. He considered drafting a message to Diane, his assistant, to alert legal counsel. He considered calling his CTO to prepare documents. He considered messaging his daughter just to hear her grounding voice. But he did none of those things. Instead, he breathed deeply, let the storm inside him settle, and made a decision. He would not just endure this. He would not reduce it to another story shared in hushed tones at dinners with friends. He would not let it be absorbed into the bloodstream of silent injustices that never see the light. This time, he would act. Janine returned to check on him, her expression caught between duty and empathy. "Is there anything else I can do for you?" "Sir," she asked. "Yes," Quentin said. His voice was calm, deliberate, as though each syllable carried the weight of the choice he had just made. "I'd like the name of your airline's CEO, the headquarters address, and the contact for your corporate communications team. I want it all in writing." Janine blinked, startled, but nodded. "Of course. I'll provide it after takeoff procedures are complete." When she left, Quentin felt the eyes of half the cabin still on him. He realized then that this wasn't just about his fight. It wasn't about revenge against Meredith Sloan or even the humiliation of being questioned at the gate. It was about making the invisible visible, about forcing accountability where it had been avoided. As the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, Quentin stared out the window. The clouds below stretched like endless waves of white. He felt the isolation of altitude, the fragility of being suspended between earth and sky. Yet he also felt clarity. In this liminal space, above the noise of the world, he had chosen a path. Bradley muttered again, but quieter this time, his confidence eroded by the silence of others around him. Quentin ignored him. He no longer needed to defend himself against one man's ignorance. His focus was fixed on something greater. He opened his phone, drafting notes as the engines roared beneath him. Names, times, phrases, Patricia at the gate, Meredith on the plane, Bradley's smirk, Officer Hernandez's cautious neutrality, Officer Collins's aggressive stance. He cataloged every detail, every nuance, knowing that documentation would become ammunition. This was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. And, as Quentin finished his notes, he whispered under his breath the words he had once told his daughter, the words she had repeated back to him in his darkest moments. "From struggle comes purpose." He closed his eyes briefly, letting the hum of the engines steady him. When he opened them again, his resolve was unbreakable. The next act of this story would not be about humiliation. It would be about transformation. The plane soared eastward, carrying not just a man in seat 2A, but the seat of something far greater than the airline could have imagined. The quiet hum of the engines filled the cabin like a heartbeat, steady and constant. Quentin Rhodes sat upright in his seat, the soft leather pressing against his back, his hands resting lightly on the armrests. To anyone passing by, he looked composed, even relaxed. But beneath that surface calm, his mind spun like a turbine, each thought sharpening into resolve. The decision had been made. He would not allow this incident to fade into yet another quiet indignity filed away in memory. Too much depended on it. Too many years of silent endurance, of nodding politely through microaggressions, of being mistaken for the chauffeur instead of the CEO, of being questioned about his presence in rooms he had built with his own brilliance. This time, it would not be buried. Across the aisle, Tiana Brooks glanced up from her phone. Her screen glowed faintly, the recording ready to be shared with the world at the touch of a button. She studied him for a moment, as though sensing the shift in his demeanor, the tightening of his resolve. When their eyes met, she gave the slightest nod. It was not encouragement, not exactly. It was recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that she understood what he was preparing to do. Quentin leaned back and closed his eyes briefly. His daughter's voice echoed in his mind. Nia always had a way of piercing through his defenses, cutting to the heart of things. He could almost hear her saying, "Dad, you've spent your life telling me to stand tall, to never let anyone shrink me. How could you let this pass?" He opened his eyes. The decision was already transforming into action. His hand reached for his phone. He began typing notes, not just about the incident, but about what it represented. He thought about his company, Axiom Forge, and how they had built security systems designed to identify hidden vulnerabilities before they collapsed into crisis. What if the same principle could be applied to discrimination? What if the patterns of bias that companies claimed were isolated incidents could be tracked, quantified, predicted, and exposed? The idea struck with the force of revelation. It wasn't new, not really. It had been circling in his subconscious for years, but he had never dared to articulate it fully. Now, in seat 2A at 35,000 feet, clarity struck. This was more than personal vindication. This could be the next evolution of his company's mission. Janine Porter, the purser, returned with a slip of paper. She bent low, speaking just above a whisper. "Mr. Rhodes, as requested. The CEO is Robert Hanford. Headquarters is in Dallas. Communications directors listed here. I wanted you to have it before we begin service." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed unease. She knew she was handing him ammunition. He accepted the slip with a nod, folding it carefully and tucking it into his jacket pocket. "Thank you, Janine." As she stepped away, Quentin could feel the gaze of Meredith Sloan at the galley. Her posture was stiff, her arms crossed. She looked away quickly when he met her eyes, but the damage was already done. The power she had wielded so casually minutes earlier had begun to slip through her fingers. The plane rocked gently again, a reminder of the fragility of flight. Quentin stared out the window at the endless expanse of clouds. He felt the paradox of being both untouchable and vulnerable in this suspended space. He thought again of his father, of his daughter, of the countless, nameless others who had endured this kind of treatment without recourse. The weight pressed against him, but so did the possibility. Bradley Whitmore broke the silence again, muttering just loud enough to carry, "Whole planes held hostage by one man's ego." His wife shushed him, but Bradley only leaned further back, smirking. Unbelievable. Quentin did not turn this time. He didn't need to. His silence was no longer submission. It was strategy. He was already envisioning how this story would be told, how it would be transformed from a moment of humiliation into the foundation of something that could shake an entire industry. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Flight attendants began their service routine, but Quentin remained still. He opened his secure notes app and began structuring his thoughts. Incident, witness, documentation, corporate accountability, predictive analytics. The words flowed like a blueprint. His company had built a reputation for seeing risks others ignored. Now he would show the world that discrimination was not only a moral failure, but a measurable liability. Tiana leaned slightly toward him, her voice soft. "Mr. Rhodes, I don't want to intrude, but when I post this, It's going to go everywhere. People need to see it. Are you ready for that?" He turned his head, meeting her steady gaze. "The question isn't whether I'm ready, it's whether the world is ready." For the first time all flight, a small smile touched his lips. It wasn't amusement, it was recognition of the turning point. He could feel the arc of his life bending in a new direction. The flight attendant returned with his water. Quentin accepted it politely, sipping slowly, savoring the brief quiet before the storm. He replayed the gate confrontation in his mind. Patricia, the gate agent, calling for security instead of accountability. Officer Hernandez, balanced but cautious. Officer Collins, hand hovering near his taser, each detail sharpened in memory, a series of interconnected signals in a system of bias. He thought about how many times he'd been told to let it go, how many times he'd been advised to pick his battles, how many times he had swallowed the anger to protect his company, his employees, his reputation. He thought of every smile he had forced, every apology he had offered for other people's comfort. No more. From struggle comes purpose. The words circled back to him, the mantra he had once given Naya in her childhood. Now they were his own compass. He opened a new document on his phone. At the top, he typed 3 words in bold: accountability now, the beginnings of a platform, a new system that would not allow companies to bury complaints under bureaucracy, a system that would treat patterns of discrimination the way his software treated patterns of cyber attacks, as risks to be identified, measured, and neutralized. He sat back, staring at those words on the glowing screen. For the first time since the confrontation began, he felt not just anger but alignment. This was what all the years of battles, of exhaustion, of proven and reproven his worth had been leading toward. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the crew prepared for meal service. Around him, passengers returned to their routines, but Quentin knew the flight was no longer ordinary. The story of Seat 2A had already begun to escape the walls of this plane, and he would make sure it reached every boardroom, every news outlet, every regulator who had ever dismissed such moments as isolated. When the attendant passed again, Quentin asked for pen and paper. She returned quickly, handing him a notepad and a silver-tipped pen. He began sketching diagrams, rough outlines of how the accountability system could integrate with existing customer service frameworks, how it could pull data from multiple sources, how it could translate human experiences into measurable, undeniable patterns. He felt the clarity that had driven him since the earliest days of Axiom Forge, when he built his company from a rented office with nothing but conviction and code. That same fire was back, but now it was sharpened by purpose. He looked up, catching Tiana watching him again. "What are you building?" she asked softly. He tapped the notepad, the inked words shining faintly under the overhead light. "A future where this doesn't keep happening." She smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "Then I'll make sure people are listening." As she lifted her phone once more, Quentin felt the inevitable weight of the storm approaching. But this time, he was not dreading it. He was ready. The plane carried them eastward through the night sky, its engines steady, its course unwavering. In Seat 2A, Quentin Rhodes had already begun rewriting the story. And when the wheels touched the ground, the airline would learn that a single man's refusal to move aside could become the spark of something unstoppable. The cabin lights brightened gently, signaling the beginning of descent. Passengers stirred, stretching stiff muscles, powering up their phones as the aircraft tilted forward into its approach. The skyline of New York began to reveal itself through the cabin windows, a jagged constellation of light rising from the horizon. For most travelers, this moment was routine. For Quentin Rhodes, it marked the threshold between decision and consequence. He had spent the last 2 hours refining notes, building diagrams on his notepad, and capturing the kind of clarity that only came once in a lifetime. Accountability. Now was no longer just an idea. It was a blueprint waiting to be unleashed. The turbulence in his mind had quieted, replaced by a strange sense of calm. Across the aisle, Tiana Brooks scrolled through her phone, her lips parted slightly in disbelief. Her video of the gate confrontation had already gone viral. The view count ticked higher every few seconds, hundreds becoming thousands, thousands becoming millions. She leaned across the aisle and whispered, "It's everywhere." CNN picked it up. Business Insider too. The hashtag "First Class While Black" is trending. Quentin's chest tightened. He had known this moment would come, but the velocity of it was staggering. He closed his eyes briefly, steadying his breathing. This wasn't just about him anymore. It had already grown beyond his control. And yet, in that loss of control, he saw an opportunity. Bradley Whitmore groaned loudly as the flight dipped lower. All this overreaction. He muttered to his wife, his voice thick with disdain. One man makes a fuss and suddenly the whole country's supposed to care. His wife's warning glance silenced him, but Quentin caught the words. He didn't flinch this time. He had bigger battles to fight. The plane touched down at JFK with a jolt, tires screeching against asphalt. The reverse thrusters roared, pushing everyone forward before the aircraft steadied and taxied toward the gate. Phones across the cabin began buzzing with notifications, a chorus of digital urgency. Quentin's own phone lit up instantly. Dozens of missed calls, messages piling in faster than he could read them. Diane, his assistant, had left 5 voicemails. Asia Johnson, his general counsel, had sent urgent texts. Media requests flooded in from networks across the country. The world had seen what happened in Phoenix, and now it demanded his response. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers leapt to their feet, tugging down bags and jostling into the aisle. Quentin remained seated, motionless. He knew what awaited beyond that door. He needed one more moment to gather himself. Janine Porter approached quietly, crouching beside him so her words would not carry. "Mr. Rhodes, I've alerted ground staff. Security will escort you to a private exit. It's already chaos out there." Quentin looked into her eyes and saw genuine concern. He shook his head. "No private exit. I walk out the front. Let them see." Janine hesitated, then nodded slowly. There was no stopping him. The door opened with its familiar hiss, and the jet bridge filled with the murmur of anticipation. Passengers streamed out, some sneaking glances back at him, others pretending indifference. When Quentin finally stood, adjusting his jacket and sliding his notepad into his briefcase, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. Captain Ethan Morales waited at the door, his posture tall, his expression solemn. As Quentin approached, the captain extended his hand. Their handshake was firm, deliberate, the silent exchange of men who understood the stakes. "Mr. Rhodes," Morales said quietly, "what happened to you wasn't just wrong, it was systemic. I've been flying for 30 years, I've seen too much. If you decide to fight this, know you're not alone." Quentin nodded once, gripping the captain's hand a fraction longer than usual. Then, stand ready. Your voice may matter more than mine. With that, he stepped into the jet bridge. The scene outside was a maelstrom. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, voices shouting questions in rapid succession. Mr. Rhodes, how do you respond to the allegations of racial discrimination? Are you planning legal action? What does this mean for Axiom Forge's upcoming launch? The clamor pressed in like a wave. Quentin did not raise his voice. He simply lifted his hand and said, "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., I will hold a press conference at the Conrad Hotel downtown. All your questions will be answered then. Until that moment, I have no further comment." The reporters erupted in protest, but the clarity of his statement gave him control. He moved forward steadily, flanked by 2 airport officers whose presence was less about protection and more about order. Behind him, the murmurs swelled. Some passengers whispered admiration, others clutched their phones, still live streaming. By the time he reached his waiting car, the video had already surpassed 10 million views inside the black sedan. Quentin finally allowed himself a long exhale. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Asia Johnson's voice on the other end, crisp and unyielding. "Quentin, the situation is escalating faster than even I expected. The airline's stock is plummeting. They've issued a statement calling it a misunderstanding. It's being torn apart online. We need to decide whether to pursue settlement or structural change." He stared out the tinted window at the blur of city lights rushing past. His mind replayed the words Patricia had spat at him. "Your kind doesn't belong in first class." He remembered the quiet fury in Captain Morales's voice. He remembered the determined nod from Tiana, the wary eyes of Janine, the dismissive muttering of Bradley. Every piece of it coalesced into a singular truth. "No settlements," he said firmly. "We make this systemic. We leverage every ounce of pressure until they change or collapse." Asia was silent for a beat. Then she said, "Then prepare yourself. This won't just be about one airline. Once we open this door, we can't close it." "Good," Quentin replied. "It's long past time." By the time he arrived at the hotel, his communications team had already transformed a ballroom into a command center. Screens displayed live feeds of news coverage. Staff hurried with laptops, drafting statements, organizing data, preparing for the morning. Melissa Jiang, his PR director, rushed to him, eyes wide with urgency. "Quentin, you've got 3 networks requesting interviews tonight: Bloomberg, CNN, and Fox Business. Social media is exploding. Hashtags are multiplying, some supportive, some hostile. We need to shape the narrative before it spirals." He held up a hand. "No interviews tonight. Tomorrow we control the story. Tonight we prepare." Melissa hesitated, then nodded. "Understood." Diane appeared next, her tablet glowing with data. "Western Financial's board just called. They're still on for the meeting, but they want to add their chief diversity officer and general counsel. They're watching closely. This could actually strengthen our leverage." Quentin felt the weight of irony. A moment meant to humiliate him at a boarding gate might instead amplify his company's influence beyond anything he had imagined. But he refused to let victory taste too sweet. The pain was still fresh, and he would not let it be reduced to opportunism. Hours passed in a blur of preparation. Quentin worked with his legal team, his engineers, his PR strategists, refining the framework for accountability now. The name itself carried urgency. the kind that resonated across boardrooms and communities alike. As midnight approached, the team dispersed briefly to rest. Quentin remained alone in the ballroom, staring at the glowing skyline of New York through tall glass windows. His phone buzzed with one last message. It was from Naya. "Dad, I'm watching everything. I'm scared for you, but I'm also proud. Don't let them shrink you. Remember what you always told me." Quentin read the words 3 times. His chest ached, but his resolve only deepened. He typed back slowly. "From struggle comes purpose. Sleep well. Nia, tomorrow is history." He set the phone down and closed his eyes. The city pulsed outside, restless and alive. Inside, he felt the same energy coursing through him. He was no longer just a passenger denied a seat. He was a man stepping into destiny, ready to turn humiliation into transformation. Morning would bring the storm, and Quentin Rhodes would be ready to meet it head-on. The ballroom at the Conrad Hotel was transformed overnight into a stage. Rows of chairs stretched to the back wall, filled with reporters, analysts, activists, and curious onlookers. Camera tripods crowded the aisles, lights glaring down in a manufactured sunrise that cast every detail into sharp relief. Screens behind the podium pulsed with the words "accountability," now in clean, modern typography. Quentin Rhodes stood in the wings, adjusting the burgundy tie that Naya had given him years earlier. He had worn it in countless boardrooms, but never in a moment like this. The tie had become less a fashion choice than a talisman, a thread of connection to his daughter, to his past, and to the generations before him who had carried heavier burdens without microphones or cameras to bear witness. Asia Johnson approached, tablet in hand, her expression serious but steady. "The airline's interim CEO is here, Renee Alvarez. She'll make her own statement after yours. She asked for a private meeting first, but I declined on your behalf." "Good," Quentin said. His voice was calm, his posture measured, but inside he felt the unmistakable tremor of adrenaline. Everything happens in the open. Melissa Jiang appeared next, her phone buzzing incessantly. "We've got live feeds from CNN, MSNBC, and Bloomberg. Social media influencers are streaming on TikTok and YouTube. This isn't just national, Quentin. It's global. People are watching from Tokyo to Johannesburg." Quentin let the information wash over him, grounding himself in the weight of it. He wasn't speaking only to this room. He was speaking to millions. The ballroom doors opened, and a ripple of sound moved through the crowd as reporters spotted him approaching the podium. Flashes burst. Microphones leaned forward. A murmur of anticipation built like the low hum of a jet engine. Quentin stepped into the lights. "Good morning," he began. His voice was steady, each word measured with the precision of a man who had spent decades navigating boardrooms where one misstep could cost millions. "My name is Quentin Rhodes. I am the founder and CEO of Axiom Forge. Yesterday morning, I was denied the seat I had paid for in first class on Sky Vista Airways Flight 247. I was told my ticket had mysteriously changed. I was told to step aside. And I was told, in words that will echo far beyond one terminal, that my kind does not belong in first class." The room stilled. Even the clicking of cameras seemed to pause. "I share this not because my experience is unique," Quentin continued, his gaze sweeping the crowd, "but because it is not. Across this country, every single day, people of color encounter discrimination disguised as procedure, hostility cloaked in professionalism, exclusion defended by policy, my wealth, my title, my suit did not protect me from it, and if it can happen to me, imagine what happens to those without my platform." He paused, letting the words settle before gesturing to the screen behind him. A new slide appeared, graphs charting rising discrimination complaints across airlines, hotels, banks, and retailers. The numbers were stark, undeniable. We have built technology to protect data. We have built systems to detect cyber attacks. But we have failed to build tools to confront another breach, the breach of trust, dignity, and equality in our institutions. That ends today. The next slide displayed the prototype of Accountability Now, sleek and intuitive. This platform aggregates complaints, analyzes patterns, and identifies risks before they become crises. It transforms what many dismiss as isolated incidents into measurable data. It quantifies the financial and reputational cost of discrimination, turning what has too often been brushed aside into numbers no boardroom can ignore. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling notes, cameras zooming in on the graphics. Quentin's voice grew firmer, carrying conviction. Accountability. Now is not about punishment. It is about prevention. It allows companies to see themselves clearly, to recognize harmful patterns, and to act before harm multiplies. Discrimination is not only morally wrong, it is expensive. It erodes trust. It drives customers away. It increases lawsuits, and it destroys shareholder value. He clicked again, and the room gasped as a chart appeared showing Sky Vista Airways' stock price plummeting in the last 24 hours. Red arrows pointed downward, billions of dollars evaporating in real time. "This is the cost of denial," Quentin said. "This is the price of silence." He paused once more, lowering his voice but sharpening its edge. "Yesterday, a gate agent thought she could humiliate me into silence. She was wrong. Today, we begin the work of ensuring no one else suffers the same indignity without consequence." He gestured toward the audience. "I am proud to announce that Stonebridge Capital has partnered with us to implement Accountability Now within their global portfolio. They understand that equity is not charity. It is risk management. It is reputation. It is good business." The room erupted in murmurs, the significance of the announcement rippling outward. Quentin straightened his notes. "Now, I'd like to invite Renee Alvarez, interim CEO of Sky Vista Airways, to make her statement." Gasps and flashes filled the air as Renee Alvarez stepped forward. Latina, mid-50s, her tailored suit immaculate, her expression calm but tense. She shook Quentin's hand firmly before turning to the microphones. "Thank you, Mr. Rhodes," she began. Her voice was steady, her eyes scanning the cameras. "First, on behalf of Sky Vista Airways, I offer our unequivocal apology for what Mr. Rhodes experienced yesterday. The words and actions of our employee were unacceptable and inexcusable. That employee has been terminated, effective immediately." Reporters shouted questions, but Alvarez raised her hand. "Second, we are launching an independent review of all customer service complaints involving potential discrimination over the past 5 years. We will not bury what we find. We will publish it." The room stirred. Quentin studied her carefully. She was not offering platitudes. She was offering exposure. "And third," Alvarez continued, turning slightly toward him, "Sky Vista Airways will be among the first companies to implement Axiom Forge's Accountability Now platform across our entire operation. Not because of public pressure, not because of viral outrage, but because it is the right thing to do. The room exploded in noise, reporters shouting, cameras flashing wildly. Alvarez stood firm, her shoulders squared. Quentin returned to the podium, the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. For the first time since Phoenix, he felt something more than anger. He felt the possibility of change. "Thank you, Ms. Alvarez," he said. "The road ahead will not be easy. Change never is. But today, we have begun, and from struggle comes purpose." He stepped back, and the room erupted again, a storm of questions and flashes, but he no longer needed to answer them. The message was out. The world had heard. Backstage, Asia's face was unreadable. "That was bold," she whispered. "You've tied their brand to ours in front of the world. Now they can't back out." "Good," Quentin replied. His voice carried the quiet strength of a man who had chosen his battlefield and was ready for the fight. Later, in the quiet of his suite, Quentin sat by the window overlooking the city. His phone buzzed with a message from Naya. "I watched the whole thing. Dad, you didn't just defend yourself. You built something bigger. I'm proud of you." Quentin closed his eyes, allowing himself a rare moment of stillness. For once, the weight of the day felt lighter. Tomorrow would bring negotiations, pushback, and doubt. But tonight, he allowed himself to believe that purpose could rise from pain. And, as the city pulsed below, Quentin Rhodes knew the fight had only just begun. The ballroom had emptied hours ago, but Quentin still felt the heat of the lights on his skin, the echo of voices bouncing inside his head. Applause had faded into chatter, chatter into silence, silence into exhaustion. He sat in the quiet of his hotel suite, jacket draped across the arm of a chair, tie loosened. His phone buzzed every few seconds with new alerts, headlines multiplying like wildfire. Rhodes redefines corporate accountability. Sky Vista pledges to clean house. Can one CEO change an industry? He scrolled, eyes heavy but mind restless. Each article carried both admiration and skepticism. Some praised his courage, others questioned his motives. A few accused him of opportunism, of turning personal humiliation into corporate gain. Asia entered the suite carrying a folder thick with papers. Her usual precision remained, but Quentin could see the fatigue in her eyes. She had been fielding calls nonstop from lawyers, journalists, investors, regulators. She set the folder on the table. "They're pushing for immediate terms," she said. "Sky Vista wants a meeting within 48 hours. They don't want to just promise implementation. They want details, contracts, timelines. They want to lock it down before the narrative shifts." Quentin rubbed his temples. "And Western Financial Stonebridge Capital's board called twice. They're ecstatic. They want to expand their partnership, but they're also nervous. They've seen the scale of what you just unleashed." He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. "I didn't unleash anything. I just held up a mirror." Asia studied him. "That mirror has teeth. You've made enemies today. Quentin, don't mistake applause for protection. Some people in this industry would rather bury you than let you succeed, and not just in airlines." He opened his eyes, meeting her steady gaze. "I know, but I also know the cost of silence." Melissa appeared next, her tablet glowing with live streams. She looked exhilarated despite the long day. "The coverage is everywhere. You're trending #1 across every platform. Hashtags, up from struggle, comes purpose, accountability, now, a Sky Vista change. Even politicians are weighing in. Senators, mayors, governors, everyone wants to be part of this. Quentin sighed. And tomorrow they'll want to move on to the next scandal. That's how the cycle works. But if we can turn this into infrastructure, into contracts, into systems, maybe it lasts. Melissa hesitated. There's something else. Bradley Whitmore, the man in first class who tried to justify Patricia's behavior. He's on TV tonight spinning his own version, claiming you escalated, that you intimidated the gate agent, that she felt threatened. Quentin laughed softly, a sound without humor. Of course he is. Men like him thrive on twisting the narrative. Asia's jaw tightened. We'll handle it. His words don't outweigh the video evidence, but it shows how quickly people will defend the status quo. Quentin rose, pacing to the window. Outside, San Francisco shimmered with nightlights, the Bay Bridge glowing like a ribbon of gold. Let him talk. The cameras may give him a platform, but the truth has legs of its own. People saw what happened. They know. He paused, resting his hands on the glass. His reflection stared back at him, older, lined, but resolute. The question is, what do we do with this moment? Do we cash the check and walk away, or do we build something bigger? Nia's message from earlier replayed in his mind. You didn't just defend yourself. You built something bigger. The suite fell into silence. Then Melissa broke it gently. What if this isn't just about airlines? What if Axiom Forge becomes the company that defines accountability across industries? Retail, finance, healthcare, education. We could be first movers. It would transform us. Asia frowned, and paint a massive target on our backs. The bigger the vision, the more enemies we attract. Investors who profit from the old ways won't stand idle. Quentin turned, his voice soft but firm. When has change ever been safe? The words hung in the air, undeniable. Later that night, sleep eluded him. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying every insult, every microaggression from boardrooms, airports, restaurants, and streets. The countless times he had chosen to bite his tongue, to keep the peace, to preserve his career at the cost of his dignity. And now, for the first time, he wondered if all those years had been preparation for this. He drifted into a restless sleep filled with fragmented dreams. Patricia's sneer, Officer Collins' hand resting too close to his taser, the roar of applause at the press conference, Nia's voice calling across a distance he could not close. He woke before dawn, the city still quiet, coffee in hand. He watched the sun edge over the horizon, light spilled across the bay, steady, unrelenting. By 7, his suite buzzed with activity again. The team gathered, laptops open, papers spread, contracts, projections, media schedules, the work of turning passion into infrastructure. Melissa read updates aloud. SkyVista's board is split. Some want to embrace your platform immediately. Others want a delay, hoping the scandal fades. Renee Alvarez is pushing hard in your favor. She sees this as her chance to redefine the airline under her leadership, Asia added. But union reps are uneasy. Flight attendants worry this will turn into surveillance on them rather than reform. Pilots are skeptical. They've heard promises before. Quentin listened, fingers steepled, absorbing every word. So we show them it's not about punishment. It's about patterns. We make sure employees see the system protects them too, by catching toxic managers before they destroy careers. Kevin Chen, his CTO, chimed in via video call. We can adapt the dashboard to highlight not just discrimination complaints, but also positive performance metrics. Balance the story, reward fairness, not just penalize bias. Quentin nodded. Do it. We're not building a weapon, we're building a compass. At noon, his phone rang, a number from Washington, D.C., the Department of Transportation. He answered, voice calm despite the jolt of nerves. Mr. Rhodes, this is Deputy Secretary Langston. We've been following your press conference. The administration is very interested in your platform. Airline discrimination complaints are skyrocketing, and we've lacked effective tools. We'd like to explore a federal partnership. Quentin's pulse quickened. Federal partnership. That meant scale, that meant reach, that meant scrutiny. I'm open to discussions, he said carefully. But accountability has to remain transparent. No backroom deals, no watered-down promises. Understood. Langston replied, let's schedule a meeting next week. When the call ended, Quentin sat in silence. The weight of it pressed on him. This was no longer about one gate agent, no longer about one airline. It was about government. It was about systemic change. That night, Nia called from Baltimore. Her face glowed on his phone screen, exhaustion in her eyes but pride in her smile. You look calm up there, she said, but I know you. Were you calm? Quentin chuckled softly. Not even close. My heart was pounding so hard I thought the microphones would pick it up. But you held steady. Nia said, that's what matters. You showed them strength without anger. You gave them no excuse to dismiss you. That's harder than most people realize. He nodded, his throat tight. It's a strange thing. Nia, for years I told myself I was fighting to make the path easier for you. Now I realize the path may never be easy, but maybe we can light it better. She smiled. Then keep going. Don't let them dim it. After the call, Quentin sat alone once more, the city stretching before him. Tomorrow would bring contracts, lawsuits, headlines, allies, and enemies. The machine of change was in motion, and he was at its center. For the first time in years, he did not feel like he was only reacting. He was steering, and though the storm raged, he felt steady at the helm. From struggle comes purpose. Morning arrived with a cool haze hanging over San Francisco Bay. Quentin stood at the window of his suite, sipping coffee, watching ferries cut their way across the water. The skyline looked softer under the early light, less like glass and steel and more like possibility. He thought about the day-ahead meetings with Sky Vista, calls with Stonebridge, negotiations that could reshape entire industries. The applause from yesterday had faded. Now came the harder work, the follow-through. Melissa knocked and entered without waiting, her tablet glowing with fresh headlines. She was already dressed for battle, navy blazer crisp, hair pinned back. Stocks up another 9%, she said. Stonebridge wants to fast-track the expanded contract. Sky Vista's board has agreed to a formal vote on adopting the platform tonight, and 4 other companies have reached out since sunrise. Quentin nodded, setting down his cup, and the backlash. Her lips pressed tight. It's there. Certain media outlets are framing you as overreacting, capitalizing on outrage. Some commentators are recycling that tired line, reverse racism. Bradley Whitmore was on another network this morning, claiming you humiliated Patricia in public. Quentin sighed. They will cling to any narrative that absolves the system. Let them talk. The truth is in the data, not their spin. Asia entered next, her expression serious but calm. We need to prepare for more than contracts. There will be lawsuits. Unions are already pushing for guarantees that the system cannot be weaponized against employees unfairly. Regulators want to know how we're handling sensitive data. Competitors are sharpening their knives. Good, Quentin replied. If no one felt threatened, we would not be doing anything worthwhile. By mid-morning, the suite had turned into a war room. Charts covered the table. Contracts lay in neat stacks. Kevin appeared on video call again, pale from lack of sleep but energized by the possibilities. He shared mock-ups of the dashboard's newest feature, a balance meter that displayed both complaints and commendations, a way to highlight not just failures but fairness. Quentin studied it closely. Yes, this is how we prove it is not about punishment. It is about accountability in the fullest sense. People should see when fairness thrives, not just when bias festers. At noon, Renee Alvarez joined them in person, arriving with 2 senior Sky Vista executives. She looked composed but weary, carrying the weight of a company in crisis. They spoke behind closed doors for nearly an hour. When they emerged, Renee's expression was more resolute than before. "We will adopt accountability now," she announced. "Full rollout, system-wide. This is not about optics anymore. It is survival. Our passengers demand it. Our shareholders expect it. And our employees deserve it." Melissa's eyes widened. That is unprecedented. No airline has ever committed to such sweeping transparency. Renee gave a thin smile. Then let Sky Vista be first. She extended her hand to Quentin. "We sign tonight." Quentin shook her hand. Firm, steady, then tonight marks the beginning of something bigger than both of us. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of calls. The Department of Transportation confirmed a meeting in Washington. Advocacy groups requested partnerships. Civil rights leaders sent messages of support. And amid the whirlwind, Na's text arrived again. "You are building something I can be proud to inherit." As dusk fell, Quentin slipped away from the crowded suite for a walk. He needed air, needed silence. He found himself by the water, the scent of salt and diesel mingling with the cool breeze. The Golden Gate stretched in the distance, its towers rising into mist. For a moment, he allowed himself to simply breathe. He thought of his father, gone too soon, who never saw the empire his son built. He thought of the countless black men and women before him who had been told to step aside, to stay quiet, to accept indignity as the price of survival. He thought of Patricia at the gate, her disdain sharpened into a weapon, and how easily the situation could have ended in humiliation, or worse, if not for status and witnesses and timing. He whispered into the breeze, as though to those who came before. Not this time. Night brought the formal sign-in. Cameras flashed as Quentin and Renee sat side by side, their pens moving across the contract that bound Sky Vista to the future. Applause filled the room, but this time Quentin listened differently. Applause was easy, commitment was harder. Still, the document in his hands was proof that commitment had begun. Reporters surged forward with questions. How would the system work? How soon would passengers see changes? What about privacy concerns? Would employees resist? Quentin answered with patience, explaining again and again that accountability was not about shame, but about safety. Not about punishment, but about trust. As the questions subsided, Renee leaned close and spoke quietly. "Do you realize what you've done? You've forced an industry to look at itself. You've given them no place to hide." Quentin met her eyes. "I didn't do it alone. The cameras did, the witnesses did, the people who refused to look away did. I only refused to step aside. Later, alone once more in his suite, Quentin opened his laptop and scrolled through the flood of messages. Thousands from strangers. Stories poured in from people who had faced discrimination in airports, hotels, banks, schools. Messages of gratitude, of solidarity, of anger finally finding a voice. He answered a few personally. Each reply deliberate, each word chosen with care. But the volume was overwhelming. He knew he could never respond to them all. And yet, each one confirmed what he already knew: this was bigger than him. Near midnight, his phone buzzed again. It was Captain Ethan Morales. The veteran pilot's voice was low, steady. Just wanted you to know. Quentin, I sent my statement to the federal investigators tonight. Detailed, comprehensive. They cannot ignore it anymore. Quentin closed his eyes, gratitude swelling in his chest. Thank you, Captain, for your courage, for all the years you carried this weight. The line was quiet for a beat. Then Morales said, some weights are worth carrying if it means handing them off to someone strong enough to change them. Quentin hung up, overwhelmed by the gravity of it all. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deep, unbroken. He dreamed not of confrontation or humiliation, but of clarity, a gate opening, not closing. The next morning, he stood before his employees at Axiom Forge headquarters in Seattle. They filled the atrium, hundreds of them, faces lit with anticipation. The company had doubled in size since its founding, but the culture remained one of family, of purpose. Quentin stepped onto the stage. He looked at the crowd: young engineers, seasoned managers, interns with wide eyes. He saw versions of himself at every age: the eager student, the weary executive, the determined leader. When I founded this company, he began, his voice carrying across the room, I wanted to protect data. I wanted to guard numbers and systems. But somewhere along the way, I realized what needed protection most was people, people's dignity, people's rights, people's humanity. He gestured to the screens behind him, where the new Accountability Now logo glowed. This is not just software. This is a promise that bias will no longer hide behind procedure, that patterns will no longer be dismissed as accidents, that people will be seen, heard, and respected. The room erupted in applause, not polite this time, but fierce, sustained. Quentin raised his hand for silence. Some will say we cannot change the world with code. I say code has always changed the world. It just depends on who writes it, and why. We will write code that exposes injustice. We will write code that forces power to answer to truth. And we will do it not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. He paused, his voice softening. From struggle comes purpose. That is what my daughter reminded me. That is what I want you to remember. Every line you write, every data set you analyze, every system you build it carries someone's story. Make it count. When the applause rose again, Quentin felt something different this time. Not the fleeting rush of approval, but the steady beat of conviction. He knew the road ahead would be brutal. Competitors would attack. Politicians would meddle. Investors would question. But he also knew something deeper: the tide had shifted. No one could unsee what the world had witnessed. No one could silence the chorus of voices rising in solidarity, and no one could erase the fact that one man's refusal to step aside had become a movement. As the crowd cheered, Quentin caught sight of Nia in the front row. She had flown in overnight, exhaustion clear on her face but pride radiating brighter. Their eyes met, and in that glance, Quentin saw the reason for everything. The long descent was over. The flight was just beginning. What began as a cruel dismissal at an airport gate became something no one could have predicted, a movement that rewrote the rules of accountability. Quentin Rhodes didn't just fight for his seat in first class, he fought for every person who's ever been told they don't belong, who's ever swallowed indignity just to get through the day. And by refusing to stay silent, he transformed his pain into power. Contracts were signed, reforms were launched. A system that had ignored voices for decades was forced to listen. Yet beyond the headlines, beyond the soaring stock price, lies the deeper truth. Respect, dignity, and equality should never be privileges. They are rights. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself how many moments of injustice pass unseen, unrecorded, unanswered, and what would happen if, just once, we all refuse to step aside. If this story moved you, share it. If it made you question, discuss it. And if you believe more people should hear it, subscribe to our channel. Together, we can make sure these stories are not forgotten and that change keeps taking flight.